You guys can see that? Yes?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. For people who don't know me, my name is Cheryl Nenn. I'm with Milwaukee Riverkeeper. I see a lot of familiar faces. And as Tim mentioned, I've been kind of a big fan of UEC since I moved into town about 21 years ago. Worked back in the trailer days doing lots of fun stuff along the river. So I've been very excited to see the center continue to grow and become more and more amazing each year. Today I was just planning to talk a little bit about more of our water quality monitoring side of things, but I can also touch on some of the other work that we do too, kind of toward the end, or if people have questions. Let's see if it's going to let me advance here. Okay, here we go. For folks that don't know, we're a small nonprofit organization, getting a little bit bigger. Our mission is to protect and improve and advocate for water quality protection, but we also work to protect wildlife habitat, along the rivers, the riparian corridors that we have, and also to advocate for sound land management in the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic watersheds. And so ultimately, we're really working toward clean, what we say, fishable, swimmable, drinkable waters or rivers. And I will talk a little bit more about that today. So folks are maybe familiar with this map, but this rough shape is essentially the watershed for the Milwaukee River Basin. And the Milwaukee River Basin also includes the Menominee River watershed and the Kinnickinnic. And obviously, so we have the UECs on the main stem here of the Milwaukee, and also we have a branch on the Menominee. But this is essentially all of the land that drains to the Milwaukee River system and then out to Lake Michigan. It's approximately 875 square miles, and about 403 of the, I would say, 800 or so miles of river. About half of them are what we call impaired. And those are the red squigglies that you see on this map. And basically what that means is that these river sections are not meeting water quality standards for something. In most cases in the kind of downtown metro area, they're often not meeting standards for multiple parameters. And we'll get into that a little bit. But we do have some, also 18 miles of trout streams. We're doing a lot of work right now in the North Branch of the Milwaukee River, which you do see some red up here, but water quality kind of in the northern part of the basin is still quite good. We have 18 miles of trout streams. We do have some trout streams that are starting to get so warm that they're starting to exceed kind of standards for cold or cool water streams. So we're looking to put in a bunch of additional equipment this year to try to start getting a better sense of what's going on up there and whether or not we can kind of ameliorate some of the climate change impacts with things like, planting trees and just very simple management measures. So the basin includes 7 counties. It starts up in a little tiny bit of Dodge County, Fond du Lac and Sheboygan counties, and then moves down through Washington, Ozaukee to Waukesha and Milwaukee County. And then we often talk about the watershed in terms of sub-watersheds, which are these different colored kind of blobs that you see here. And we'll talk a little bit more about those today in terms of what the water quality is in these areas. So just a quick slide on what we do for folks that aren't familiar with us. We do water monitoring, and I started doing that with the group of kids that we worked with at UEC back in probably 2002-ish. We worked with 10 different high schools and started piloting a lot of water quality monitoring at that time, and then have really built our program. And I think I have another slide about that, but we really started pretty early on and really solidified our program probably around 2006. And so we have been doing monitoring since then, and we'll talk a lot more about that today. We also do a lot of paddle events, just try to get people out on the river. We manage our Milwaukee Urban Water Trail, which are really just, is giving people the tools and the information to know how to safely and legally access the rivers. And we do a lot of events also throughout the year. And I know UEC obviously does an amazing job as well, getting people out onto the water, because, we really feel that if people aren't enjoying the water, aren't using the rivers, they're not going to want to help us protect them. So we also do a lot of river cleanups. We've been doing them since 1995 or thereabouts, which is when our organization started. I think last year we had about 4,500 people that came out on the spring cleanup. This year it will be Saturday, April 20th from 9 to noon. And I think in addition to that, we have Adopt a River program now where we have about 150 different groups that go out and clean up different parts of the river, 2+ times a year, just encouraging them to go out and more regularly clean up some problem spots that we have in the basin. And increasingly just trying to get a lot of those folks too involved with us and also partner organizations to do things like tree planting and invasive removal, especially where in some cases we don't have enough trash to keep people busy. There's often a lot of other things that we're hoping to get them to work on. We also do some patrolling. We have a boat that mostly operates in downtown Milwaukee. And we do a lot of education together with a lot of great groups like UEC and others, just to educate people about the river. And then I do a lot of advocacy. It's kind of my own job. And so just a quick note on Riverkeeper and what that means. We, as I mentioned, we started in 1995 actually as Friends of the Menominee River, and then we became Friends of Milwaukee's Rivers for a while too. But we, I think back in around 2010, changed our name to Milwaukee Riverkeeper. And that's because we have been part of a larger movement, which is called Waterkeeper Alliance. Since about, it was before I started, so probably, I think it was like 98 or so, we became a member organization of them. And they really started out with Hudson Riverkeeper, which some people might be familiar with, which was based in New York City on the Hudson. But that movement has really grown to around 350 different waterkeepers in 43 countries. And we're each independent organizations or watchdogs for our river or our bay or our coastline. And the idea with it is really, we respond to, citizen community concerns and complaints. And we, work with a lot of different partners to find solutions to problems that are affecting the river. But we also, physically patrol. Waterkeepers are required to have some sort of watercraft, whether it could be a canoe or a kayak or a whitewater raft, depending on the river. Just to get people out on the water patrolling. And we, as part of that too, conduct proactive monitoring to also, look for sources of pollution and also just to monitor the health of our waterways. And so that had a little bit to do with us, starting this program. Another thing that I do is I review all of the permits. So anybody who's looking to discharge into a waterway through a pipe, it's a WIPD's permit, but it's the Wisconsin Pollution Discharge Elimination System. But I review all of those permits. Anybody who's developing within a couple hundred feet of the river needs a different type of state permit called a Chapter 30, but those are projects largely that they're developing along a waterway or within a couple hundred feet of a waterway. They need to put special protections in place to protect the river. So I also monitor all those permits, and increasingly we're starting to see more factory farm applications. There's one right now in Trenton, which is just basically east of West Bend and actually very close to River Edge. There's a farm that's proposing to almost quadruple their number of cows. So that's becoming kind of another area that we're getting increasingly involved in. So just a brief history. Before 2006, there were a lot of different water monitoring programs. Certainly UEC, River Edge, we're doing, educational monitoring. Washington County at that time too, as well, had a pretty good program of getting residents together to do water monitoring. But it was all kind of using different protocols and equipment. And so around 2006, the state came together with a bunch of different groups and said that they really wanted to come up with a more systematic system, like a better system of monitoring to make sure that everybody was using essentially the same type of equipment and protocols. And so they came up with a tiered citizen-based monitoring strategy. And it really is basically there's what we call level 1, which is the introductory level, which tends to use more inexpensive equipment like hot kits, things like that. And then there's a level 2 program, which we've kind of been trying to transition most of our people into, which is using a little bit more expensive equipment, mostly meters, but some, other, macroinvertebrate monitoring, flow monitoring, things like that. And then we also have what we call level 3 monitoring, and I can touch on a couple of those today. And that's like specialized monitoring. And so that's monitoring for things like road salt, phosphorus, and also emerging contaminants, which is a project that we've worked with UEC on. Those are kind of considered in a separate tier, where DNR might look at those kind of independently. So we were really involved in setting that system up for the state of Wisconsin and piloting actually quite a lot of the citizen monitoring protocols, especially for phosphorus and bacteria and road salt. Have been involved with that kind of my whole career. And then we actually started doing report cards in 2010. And the idea really was to try to figure out a way to make this data more accessible to the people so that it's not just in a state database somewhere where no one can access it. And so we really wanted to make sure to get the information out so that people could use it to make their own decisions about their families and how they're using the river and things like that. So, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about a report card today too, and all of our report cards are available on our website, which is MilwaukeeRiverkeeper.org. So these are just fun pictures of monitoring throughout the year. Keep losing my little thingamabob. And so this is just pictures of some of our volunteers. We definitely do trainings every year. We do a level 1 training generally at River Edge. And we have a lot, there's a lot better diversity of invertebrates. And I think a lot of you guys, if you've done invertebrate sampling in the rivers, know, there's a lot more fun stuff kind of a little bit further up in the watershed. So we tend to do some of our training events up there, but we also do training events locally as well, especially for our level 2 monitors. And so those are generally around like the first weekend in May is when we do our big trainings, but we get out and kind of train people how to do the monitoring. And these are the types of parameters that we're looking for. Again, these are kind of really key for, getting a better understanding of the health of the water. So things like oxygen, turbidity, which is how much kind of solids or sediment is in the water, water temperature, super important for fish, obviously, and the different types of fish that can survive in the rivers and creeks, phosphorus, pH, conductivity, chloride, and we also look for macroinvertebrates, and increasingly doing quite a lot of mussel monitoring as well. So this is not from our report card. This is our most recent year of monitoring sites. We get a question, which is a very valid one, of why our report card is kind of old, because we just released our 2022 report card, and it is in fact now early 2024. Hard to believe, but it takes us quite a while to get the data. For example, for 2023, we have all of our own data, I think, from all of our volunteers at this point. But we are still waiting for MMSD data, and we're waiting for Ozaukee County data. And we often don't get that till February, or sometimes later than that. So it takes us a while to get the data and to do the analysis on it and clean it up. And then basically start kind of doing the grading, which I'll talk about in a second. But I just wanted to give folks a sense of what the sites that were monitored last year. So it's a little bit more, recent data. And so the level 1 monitoring, which are those introductory monitors, are the pink triangles that you see on here. And the goal with a lot of our level 1 monitoring is just to make sure that those folks are, that they're going to be good volunteers, that they're interested in this. There are people that we train every year, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this if you've trained community volunteers for different things. Some people just want to go to that first training and are kind of like maybe not very excited about continuing to go out every month. And so that's fine. We just want to make sure that folks that we're giving like our level 2 equipment are going to be really committed and going out there monthly. The cost differential between like our level 1 and level 2 equipment goes from like $200 to it's close to like $1,700 now for a set of equipment for the level 2 volunteers. So we want to make sure that's not sitting in a closet somewhere, that it's actually out there being used and, to assess water. So, and then those blue triangles that you see are all of our level 2 sites. So I think last year we had close to like around 110 locations that we monitor in the basin. I should say too, these are just our monitoring sites. So this doesn't include MMSD or DNR or Ozaukee County data. And you can kind of see a hole in downtown Milwaukee, and that's partly because those are those larger rivers that aren't easy for volunteers to wade into, obviously. MMSD does a lot of monitoring in the kind of estuary section of the river, so we leave that to them. So this is just the cover of our most recent report card. It is available on our website, and so most of the graphics and stuff I'll be showing today are available on the report card. And I can send the actual link to Tim, and he could send that out to folks later. So what we do, our real purpose of our water quality, I think in addition to making sure that we're being transparent with the data and making sure that people have access to it, is that we also want to compare our data to water quality standards and targets that we have at the state or federal levels. And we also like to just highlight other, things that are happening in the basin. And I think that's important because I think one of the other kind of criticisms I think we get, or I don't know if criticism, but water quality, it's taken us a long time to get to the point of the water quality that we have. And it's going to take us a long time to get from, in some cases, an F to an A, right? Or a C to an A. And so, and I think there are a lot of incredible improvements happening and incredible work happening in the watershed, and it's very exciting work. And often that isn't reflected in like a grade for 1 year. We are looking at kind of trying to do a more digital portal that would have like the last like 20 some years of data. That would be more interactive for people that really want to geek out and kind of dive into a certain site's water quality data, or maybe into looking at your backyard to really see what the water quality data is there. And so hopefully we'll be able to have that up and running in the next couple of years or so. So these are just examples of folks that we get data from for the report card. This is just kind of an example of what a data sheet looks like. So for folks that have done water monitoring data, probably looks pretty familiar. A lot of the macroinvertebrate protocol too is based on the Water Action Volunteers protocol from the state of Wisconsin. So, one of the biggest things is putting all of the data together and cleaning it. The way that we download it, all of our data is put into a statewide database called SWIMS. And that data, when it gets downloaded out of the system, is kind of a disaster. And I think the state is still trying to figure out better ways to fix that system, and kind of, they have come up with an automatic way where our volunteers can kind of print out site-specific reports for their own sites. So they're making improvements to it all the time, but it takes a long time to get the data together and clean it and make sure that there's no typos or decimal points in the wrong locations, that kind of thing. So this is essentially, we look at each site and we will grade it based on the percentage of time that the data meets a target. So often that's a state target or sometimes a federal target or regulation. And then we basically apply the same system to giving a grade to those sub watersheds, those kind of colored blobs I showed you earlier. And then we give kind of an ultimate watershed grade and then a Milwaukee River Basin grade. So that would be for that whole, roughly 900 square mile area. And so looking at 2022, it's where I have to like move myself around so I can read these things. So the Milwaukee River watershed actually was a C grade in 2022, which I know doesn't sound that good, but I think it's the first time we've seen that the Milwaukee River watershed like in a solid C in quite a while. I think the South Branch too of Milwaukee moved from a D to a C minus for the first time in 6 years. So I think that's a really big deal, especially since 2022 was a much wetter year. I think there was like 10 more inches of rain than 2021. So the fact that we had a wetter year and also better water quality year is kind of a big deal. Often a lot of our water quality, if we have really poor years of water quality, it's because we've had a lot of rain and a lot of runoff from the land. And so this past year, we had a lot of improvements. The basin overall went from a D plus to a C minus. And so that's looking at the Milwaukee, Menominee, and the Kinnickinnic. And I think all of the sub watersheds improved except for the Kinnickinnic, which was about the same. coming in around a D minus. So obviously that's not a great grade. Wouldn't want to take that home to mom. And also the east-west branch, which is interesting in that it is probably one of our better watersheds. And almost every year it has a pretty solid B grade, but we did not see any real significant improvements in that watershed and saw some decreases in grade. I think because of some of the agricultural trends that we're seeing in that watershed in particular. So this is looking at the whole map. So this is again looking at our 2022 data. And so this is similar to the map I showed you before. The colors of these blobs on here or these icons, I should say, are the quality of the site. So where you see like a lot of green up here, this is Cedar, kind of Big Cedar Lake, Little Cedar Lake area. The water quality is pretty good. The mostly green icons that you see there. The shape of the icon is who's doing the monitoring. So Riverkeeper sites are kind of a shield icon. And then we have DNR as triangles, MMSD as circles. And then I think Ozaukee County are squares. So you can just tell like who's doing the monitoring. But like up here, if you can see my cursor, this is like kind of the Kettle Moraine area, state forest. So mostly a lot of green in here, but you will see some reds and oranges. And a lot of this is kind of the ag that's on the west branch of the Milwaukee River. So pretty interesting area. And I think that's partly why we're seeing some water quality degradation over there. And then looking kind of at the actual, kind of the grades for the watersheds, we have them here kind of in this large map, the overall grade here, and then for each watershed, what the grades are. And so I'll look a little bit about this. There is a timeline in the report card that talks about our whole monitoring program. And I just kind of wanted to highlight that because that talks about a lot of the work, how it's changed over time. If you go and check that out later. So the east and west branch, which I just kind of showed, this is got a B minus again in 2022. And you really can tell it's doing pretty well for all of the kind of main parameters that we would really look at for aquatic health, which is like temperature and oxygen, turbidity. So that's all really good news. But this watershed, as well as most of the other watersheds in the basin, even though we saw pretty marked improvements in some cases in things like bacteria, the grades are still F grades. And similarly, I think this is one of the few watersheds where we did see a worse phosphorus grade than we had the year before, which is obviously not a trend that we'd like to see. And a lot of the watersheds are different too, based on the land use. You can see here too that there's quite a lot of agriculture in this watershed, and the land use and how it's being used is so key to the water quality grade. Let's see, let's go really quick. So just showing another example, this is the Milwaukee River watershed here. We still have quite a lot of agriculture if you look just at the Milwaukee River. So this is not including the Menominee or the Kinnickinnic. Quite a mix of land uses here. And we have quite a lot of sites, like 97 of our sites are in the Milwaukee River. And this is including sites from everybody who's doing monitoring. Again, water quality is pretty good for those key parameters, but we're again seeing Fs and these kind of bacteria, phosphorus parameters. And let's see, move things around here. So this is our Menominee. Sadly, the Menominee is not doing as well as we would like, although if you see these little arrows kind of show you trends from one year to the next. I'm not sure what that's all about. Again, a lot of the key parameters are doing pretty well, but we still have a lot of challenges for the bacteria and phosphorus, and also turbidity, which is really just the amount of dirt in the water. The Menominee is about, this says 67% urban, but I think it's probably a little bit more than that, around, let's say 70% urban. When we do have rain events, it's very flashy. So, the water levels will go from very low to very high in a very short period of time. And because of how urban the watershed is becoming, when it rains, a lot of that runoff is carrying, sediment and dirt and different chemicals and pollutants that are tied to the dirt. that is washing into the river pretty quickly. And those flows change really significantly. You know, they'll go up very quickly, drop very quickly, and that can also lead to a lot of stream bank erosion. And so that erosion as well is causing even more sediment to be kind of sent into the river. So the Menominee still had about a good chunk of agriculture in it. There's about 11 or so % in the very upper portions of the watershed. We just finished a special water quality management plan for this area, which is an EPA. They call it a 9 key element plan, but it's really looking very in depth at the water quality in the Menominee. And I wrote, I think, that plan for the most part with some help. And you know, we think that the 10% that's left will be largely converted to urban probably in the next 10 to 15 years. And so that's a challenge for us, because even where we're making a lot of water quality improvements in the watershed, we're also kind of battling development and kind of conversion of a lot of land, especially in the upper portion of the watershed. So the Kinnikinnick likewise, you know, is not our best grade. It's very urban. So if you look at this, it's like 97% urban. It's probably the most urban watershed is the most urban watershed in Wisconsin. And likely probably one of the most urban watersheds in the country, but very hard to deal with because there's so much runoff every time it rains. You know, we have a D- grade, obviously, and not great grades for some of these other parameters, but we are seeing some really significant improvements. We saw like almost a 20% improvement in chloride in 2022. And I think part of that is because we actually had, that year we didn't have a lot of snow. It was kind of a fairly dry winter. Maybe, we'll see what happens this year. But you know, and even within the Kinnikinnick, there are definitely improvements in certain parameters, and a lot of really exciting work going on there to remove concrete channel and improve flood management that I think will also see, you know, pretty huge improvements in water quality as well. So this is looking at total phosphorus. So this is not, this graph, or this map, I should say, is not in the watershed, but again, phosphorus is a really huge problem for us. So you see basically all Fs and Ds in that category. I should say, so the phosphorus wasn't originally part of the Clean Water Act. The states were supposed to put standards in by 1987. The federal government kind of decided to punt on that issue because it was a, you know, it was a hot button issue. They didn't want to go there. So our state didn't put any standards in. So in 2010, Milwaukee Riverkeeper and 6 other groups, we filed a notice of intent to sue EPA. They were supposed to put in nutrient standards if the states failed to do so. And that essentially led to the EPA saying to the state of Wisconsin, you have to put these standards in or we will, because we pretty much had them dead to rights legally. And so that did, you know, basically lead to us getting standards for phosphorus in 2010. We had not had any prior to that time. And that was at the point when we really kicked up our phosphorus sampling. And so a lot of our citizen data has led to most of the phosphorus impairments in the watershed, as well as kind of the chloride impairments and some of the other listings. And so because of this, an impairment is basically, these are sites, a lot of these sites don't meet our water quality standards. So as part of that, EPA is required to come in and do a plan, which is called a total maximum daily load, which is very wonky. But essentially I tell people it's like a pollution diet. So we say we have too much phosphorus, it's like eating too many calories, and we need to ratchet that phosphorus down. And so that is actually happening. We have a special plan for the entire basin for phosphorus and for sediment and also for bacteria. And so essentially anybody who discharges those pollutants, which is, for example, for phosphorus, it's sewage treatment plants, it can be industries, they all have to reduce that level each year of their permit to try to get back to more healthy levels. The tricky part with phosphorus is that it's a common agricultural nutrient too. It's in manure. So a lot of that manure runoff has a lot of nutrients in it, nitrogen and also phosphorus. And phosphorus we tend to pay a little bit more attention to because a little tiny bit of phosphorus can cause a lot of disaster in a freshwater system. You know, a lot of algae and then a lot of other water quality problems as that algae kind of is broken down. But, you know, the good news, I guess, is even with these horrible grades for things like phosphorus and bacteria is that we do have plans, at least on the point source side, to ratchet that pollution down. The tricky part is really on the runoff side. The cities have a lot to do. They're putting in a lot more green infrastructure. When I first moved here, it was like impossible to get anyone to do a rain garden. And I remember the city of Milwaukee folks telling me like, oh, someone's going to open their car door and fall in a rain garden and sue us. And like it was such a challenge to get them to do anything. And now it really has become the new normal. Like a lot of the cities, because of the phosphorus regulations, are having to reduce that source of pollution as well, because even though that pollution is running off of all of our landscapes, it is getting into a river via a pipe. And so they are permitted and they have to like ratchet that down. And that is why they're doing a lot of green infrastructure. That is partially why they're doing like street sweeping. That street sweeping really is to clean a lot of the sediments or the solids that contribute to that turbidity grade, which is here. And also phosphorus, a lot of it is bound to sediment. Some of it is also dissolved in water. But a lot of those practices that you see the city doing, it's really to, because they're being required by EPA now to reduce those sources of pollution. And we've been able to kind of confirm that it's still a problem because of a lot of the water monitoring. So I'm going way late, which I told Tim I probably would, but just want to touch a couple other things. So phosphorus, this is really looking at the Menominee. I know UEC has another facility, obviously the Valley Branch along the Menominee, which is probably around here. Could be this dot. So phosphorus is a huge problem, particularly in the Menominee. You know, this is a bit of a sad graph, but these are all of the sites and how many, you know, exceedances we've had of the phosphorus standard. Or actually, I think these are just kind of mean concentrations. Sorry. We have another one that has all of the total exceedances, but I think that's a different graph. But obviously, we have a lot of work to do in the Menominee to deal with this. So road salt, I just touch on really quickly. As we all know, the last couple of weeks, there's been an incredible amount of snow, incredible amount of salt application, and a lot of runoff of that salt into our waters. You know, we've really seen a massive shift in increased salting. If you go from the mid-50s to kind of present day, the chloride levels in surface waters have been rising pretty precipitously. There is a huge study going on right now that SewerPAC, our regional planning commission, is working on, looking at the sources of chloride and kind of the state of the art technology for dealing with chloride. And the recent chapters that we just reviewed this week are looking at the biological impacts of road salt. And so, which is very interesting, and I could do a whole hour about that, but a lot of the impacts of salt on organisms like mussels, like invertebrates, fish, and even, you know, mammals, there's a lot of big issues. And so we're seeing a lot of road salt runoff into our water. We look at that in different ways. We have two different types of, well, in addition to it being very harmful to fish and aquatic life, it's obviously harmful to vehicles and infrastructure, to soils and plants, things like that. We have two different levels of chloride that we really focus on, and the levels aren't, you know, the actual number obviously isn't important, but we're looking at an acute level, and basically that's a level of salt that we think could result in death to fish and other aquatic organisms. And then we have something called chronic toxicity, which is a lower amount of salt that over a more prolonged period we think also could be toxic. So those are the two different levels that we assess all of our data on. And we've been doing road salt monitoring with volunteers since 2010, mostly focusing on January to April because that's generally when we get snow now. And folks will go out and look for conductivity, which is kind of measures all of the kind of charged particles in the stream. But we know it's very tightly correlated with road salt, especially in winter months. So when the volunteers, their meter tells them they have a high level of conductivity, they'll grab a sample and we send that to our state lab for chloride analysis. This is just kind of showing the correlation curve between conductivity and chloride, which is a wonky science thing. So anyway, this is the kind of some of the results here. Again, I have to keep moving this bar around so I can see my graphs here. So this is looking at our summary from 2002 to 2021, and the top graph is looking at the chronic and the bottom is looking at the acute. So you'll see, you know, especially in those winter months, like 17% of the samples in February exceeded that level that can be instantly toxic for fish. So that's very scary data. But looking at the chronic level, which is that lower level of salt, you know, we're seeing exceedances again in the winter months, but also you can see some in the summer months. And that is starting to get very concerning. Honey Creek last year had exceedances every single month that was tested, except for one, I think. And that includes the summer months. And we think a lot of that is there's salt that's in the bottom of the river. During those summer months when we have less water in the stream, it's getting more concentrated. Or the chloride concentrations are higher. So that could be part of it. But the other thing is we think a lot of the groundwater in the region has been so contaminated with chloride that in the summer months, if you look at like in August, the reason the rivers don't dry up, right, if the groundwater starts kicking in, that base flow starts kicking into the river. And if that groundwater is contaminated with chloride, with road salt, that is going to make the river more salty. So that is something that Sewer PAC's looking at very closely, and Dr. Paradis at UWM is doing some work trying to really correlate that groundwater to surface water piece. But we also think as part of some of this green infrastructure that we're putting in to help with things like solids, to help with phosphorus, which I just talked about, we might also be infiltrating more road salt into the groundwater. Luckily for us, most of us drink the big lake right next to us. But in areas like Madison, it's starting to become a real problem because their wells are so salty that it's starting to become an issue. They've had to shut down, I think, at least one well at this point. So this is a huge challenge for us. And unfortunately, there are different products, but even some of the additional products that are out there, like if you look at like calcium chloride is better than sodium chloride, and it works in like those kind of colder temperatures, but still chloride based. Magnesium chloride, and there was something called calcium magnesium acetate, which we were telling people to use, which we were told was like the most environmentally friendly de-icing product. We're finding frequently, I think Steve Corsi at USGS has been looking at this, and there's now some new results that magnesium can be very toxic to fish and aquatic life. So, the best thing that we can really do is minimize how much we're using. Again, this is really looking just at the percentage of samples exceeding standards here. So similar to what we showed before. And then this is the same data. The good news is in the more rural part of our watershed, you'll see a lot of greens. So that means we've gone out there and tested and not found any exceedances. This is looking at the higher level, or the instantly toxic level. But again, you look at the Menominee in particular, or even, the area where UEC is here on the Milwaukee, we have a lot of exceedances here. MMSD who's doing a lot of the data in this area. They don't test a lot in the winter months, and so I think we actually have a data hole here that we probably need to fill. But anyway, I think just kind of an example of there's a lot that we can do personally as well. This is just again looking at where we're monitoring road salt. Road salt's different than a lot of our baseline monitoring in that we don't test the same sites every year. Once we know that they're essentially toxic, we move on and try to look at other creeks that we haven't monitored before. And we have had 117 miles of river listed for chloride impairments, which is pretty amazing. And the way that the monitoring has to be done, we're really the only ones doing it in the winter months and at the frequency that's required to list the streams. So, we're basically giving DNR the information that they need to list these rivers on this kind of list that showing that these are problem areas. And so what that means is that if you have a permit, you have let's say a cheese company coming in on Uleo Creek or something, and they want to discharge to that creek, they cannot increase the amount of salt going into that creek. You can't add any new discharges of salt or any increased discharges of salt. So it does give us protection in the regulated world, and also will require that our basin, and we were talking about this earlier in the week, will have to have one of these EPA plans to ratchet that pollution down. Again, that will probably impact the cities, will impact industrial dischargers, food manufacturers that are discharging salt. But that's going to be another pollutant that's really hard to deal with because it's coming from so many sources. And a lot of those sources include us, where we live, where we work. So, we do encourage people, if you see oversalting, like this is a ridiculously oversalted, you can let us know, and we talk to the city, generally the cities that we work with about it, to try to get them to do a better job. We also do road contractor trainings we've been doing since 2010, where we're basically training public and private contractors on kind of the best, most sustainable de-icing practices, kind of best practices for the industry. And there is a group called SaltWise now, which is a statewide collaborative that's really focusing on salt. And we've been involved with them. So if it ever snows again, I think we all know these things, but shovel early and often, really try to reduce your salt. You really only need a coffee cup of salt that for 10 sidewalk squares or most of our Milwaukee driveways. And so you really shouldn't, you should be seeing a lot of space in between salt granules. And after the storm, if you have some left over, you can sweep it up. If you leave it out, it will eventually dissolve and run off into a storm drain and likely into the river. But if you have some left over after a storm event, you definitely can sweep it up and reuse it. There is a bill right now at the state level, which is SB 52, which it has passed the Senate. It hasn't passed the Assembly yet, and it's been quite a political roller coaster, I can tell you. But this essentially is one of the barriers that we have talking with private contractors to reduce their salt application, is that they are told by their customers, which are like, let's say, the big box stores like a Home Depot or a grocery store, that they want them to be able to see the salt on the lot. So if someone slips and falls, they're not going to be sued. And they know they're applying too much. A lot of them have been trained to use the right amount of salt and to switch to more liquid de-icers, which you don't even see at all. And they use much less salt. They are afraid to use these practices because they're afraid of litigation. So this bill would say if a contractor goes through a class like the ones Riverkeeper provides, or the ones that SaltWise or others, provide, if they go through a class and they actually pass a test, that they would have liability protection from lawsuits. Doesn't mean they couldn't be sued, but they would have a protection if they were sued. This has been passed in a couple of states out east. I don't know if it's going to pass the Assembly or not. And there's kind of been a couple of legal words changed that are concerning some of the folks that we've been behind this bill. But we still do think it's a really good bill. So if people wanted to, contact your legislators about something, that would be a good one to talk to them about. The Assembly probably only has 2 more weeks of work this year. I just found out. So it's like on the 9th of February that week and the 16th of February, they'll be working, and then probably not again for the whole rest of the year. So nice for them. But there's going to be a lot of bills that are being pushed in the last couple of weeks here. All right, so I'm very late. And I might just do this slide, and then I don't know if I have time for everything else, but bacteria is a big issue. I was just going to give a shout out to, this is some emergent contaminant work that we've worked on with Tim and Maggie and others, looking at emergent contaminants, which are pharmaceuticals and personal care products. We finally have a lot of the machines are fixed at UWM, and we're finally getting some data over like the last 5-6 years of sampling that we've done, I think since 2018. So luckily, I think a lot of this data will all be hopefully updated in the next 6 months or so. We were able to get a little bit of funds to keep a grad student on at the School of Freshwater Sciences to kind of go through and analyze a lot of that data. So I'm excited about that. But, this is basically showing that a lot of the drugs that we're on, including caffeine, including, like cocaine. I'm surprised at how much cocaine that we're seeing, actually. It was an interesting thing, but a lot of the drugs that we're on, the rivers are also on, basically. And a lot of this is because we have some leaky sewers. And also a lot of this can't be removed in the sewage treatment process. And so if you look at the Milwaukee River, we have 11 sewage treatment plants. A lot of this stuff could be going through sewage treatment plants, maybe slightly less concentration. Some of these chemicals can actually get more concentrated through the sewage treatment process. So this is probably decades worth of research for a lot of grad students looking at these drugs, what it means for aquatic life and fisheries, what it could mean for our drinking water supplies, and then just trying to get a little bit more information together about that. So I think I'll just end here and then see if there's any questions. This is just a reminder that there is a open house coming up fairly soon, and this is really going to be focused on the Milwaukee River Estuary Area of Concern project, which hopefully you guys have heard about, which is this big project to dredge a lot of the contaminated sediments in the river. And also there's about 20 some habitat projects that are being planned, really in the Greenway area, but along up and down the whole entire Menominee River as well. A lot of really great habitat projects that are being proposed. So this meeting is really going to focus on the Greenway area and 11 different floodplain areas that will be cleaned up, including the area right by UEC. And so that would be great if we could get a good crowd to that. It's from 5 to 7. There's like an open house with a lot of scientists and displays, and then there'll be a presentation, I think at 6. So with that, how many questions can I